And at one point, again, on the phone with my dad, I was just going, he's going, well, we're having one of our weekly "What are you going to do next?" conversations, and I said something like, I probably know about as much about surfing as anybody else does at this point. And he goes, well, why don't you write an encyclopedia? And I went, ha ha ha. And he didn't laugh back. And so my dad planned on this idea, do an encyclopedia.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wrote a reference book. I wrote an A through Z reference book with short little things from Kemp Auberg to Frida Zamba.
Yeah.
And it took forever. I blew through so many deadlines. People at Harcourt were basically writing me off this whole thing. And it came out, and it kind of blew everyone's mind, because I don't think people didn't know that I was actually going to take that much time and write it like a real.
Yeah.
I took the project really, really seriously.
Are you ready, boys? Start swimming.
That's Matt Warshaw. I'm Jamie Brisick. This is Soundings, brought to you by the Surfers Journal. The Journal is a member-supported publication made possible by sponsorship from FCS, Finisterre, Howler Brothers, Outerknown, Patagonia, Rainbow Sandals, Vans, and Yeti. More like a book than a magazine, the Journal delivers 136 pages of independent storytelling every 8 weeks, covering the people, culture, travel, and art of surfing. To learn more and to subscribe, please visit surfersjournal.com. This episode of Soundings is presented by Costa Sunglasses. If you're anything like me and you spend lots of time around the water, then you know just how important it is to have a good pair of shades. And since 1983, when a group of intrepid outdoorsmen set out to make sunglasses that could stand up to the harsh environments they regularly encountered, Costa remains the choice in eyewear among those committed to life on the water. So whether you're diving in, climbing a board, suiting up, sliding one, leaning back, or all the above, head to costadelmar.com to grab your pair and to see what's out there. Where to start with Matt? We first met in the late 1980s when he was the editor of Surfer magazine. A wordsmith, he was also a former pro surfer. In fact, I can remember seeing him tuck into an unlikely shorebreak barrel in one of the OP pros. In 1990, he left his editor's post at Surfer to attend UC Berkeley, where he got his BA in history in 1993. He remained in the Bay Area, parking himself in an apartment in the Sunset District and in countless Ocean Beach barrels. A side note, for a time in the late 1990s and early aughts, Matt would paddle out into Ocean Beach's wedgy A-frames and focus solely on tube time, passing up good, shapely waves if they didn't offer up the green room. As if personally expanded by all those tubes, Matt's writing expanded into lengthy essays, profiles, and books, many books, among them Mavericks, The Story of Big Wave Surfing, Above the Roar, 50 Surfer Interviews, Photo Stoner, Surfriders in Search of the Perfect Wave, Surf Movie Tonite, Surf Movie Poster Art 1957 and 2005, and many more. His Encyclopedia of Surfing, first released in 2003, is the most comprehensive tome of surf culture in existence, and he followed it up with 2010's The History of Surfing, a beast of a book that makes music of Matt's encyclopedic knowledge. His most recent venture is the EOS.surf, which is an invaluable online resource for us surf obsessives, and features The Sunday Joint, a reflective op-ed style piece that Matt shoots out to subscribers every Sunday. Matt's a husband, a father, a resident of Seattle, Washington. But we spoke at his brother's house in Manhattan Beach when he was in LA visiting family. Matt and his son Teddy had just come back from body surfing. His hair was still wet. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jamie. Stoked to be here.
I'm curious, we've known each other for so many years now. How did you find your way into surfing?
My mother's younger brother was a lot younger. Like he was the golden-haired accident to my grandparents. He was born 15 years after my mom, and that put him right in the sweet spot to begin surfing during that sort of Gidget thing, right? So that's Uncle Daniel. And from when I was really little, when we were living in San Fernando, that's where I was born and raised, because Daniel was closer to my age. Like he was just so cool. And he was tall, he was blonde, you could just tell he was cool. He still is cool. Uncle Dan's still cool. And when I was about 5 or 6, I wanted sort of three things in life. I wanted to race dragsters, and I wanted to play drums, and I wanted to surf because Daniel was a surfer. And my mom told him that, and he came over to our house in Tarzana with, I think he had, it was like a 9.6 Hansen or something. That was his board. And I was, go get your trunks on, Matt. And I came out and he put me on the board, and I was tiny. And he said, I'm going to push you across. And when you're halfway across, jump up to your feet. And then before you get to the other end, run up to the nose and put your hand out so it doesn't smash the nose. So he just pushed me back and forth across the pool a few times when I was 6. And I loved it. And I go, I'm a surfer, except I lived in Tarzana, right? And then
I relate.
100, yeah, right. And then 100% unrelated to any of this, the lucky break that really led us to this point right here was 2 years after that, my parents moved to Venice, which wasn't in the cards then. And it happened really suddenly. And suddenly there I was already a surfer because of what happened in the pool. But now I got to go to Venice, and I actually had a couple of years where I was body surfing. I got my first board at 9 from Uncle Daniel, which was a cut down, so 69. So it was a cut down longboard, just a straight zero rocker, 7/4 pintail, flat as a table, that I learned to surf on it on the north side of Santa Monica Pier when Jay Adams and I got started. So that was sort of how it all started. Santa Monica Pier, then you make that. We talked about this before. I went from north side of Santa Monica Pier, which when I drive past it now, I don't even see how a person could begin surfing there because there's never any wave. I mean, maybe in the 60s there must have been a tiny bit more surf because there was a lot of other beginners out there. And then you move from north side Santa Monica Pier to Bay Street, Pico.
Yep.
And then to Venice Breakwater and Venice Jetty because I was right in front of my house.
Okay.
And then the great leap was up to Malibu. And that's where at some point you and I we didn't quite cross paths, but that's where you and I.
Yeah, we share that.
We share that. Point.
Yeah. So this would have been early kind of Jeff Ho Zephyr Dogtown days, right?
No, that came. When did I get my first Jeff Ho? Probably when I was 12 or 13. It always sounds like I'm name dropping Jay, which I kind of do. I mean, Jay, I think about Jay all the time because of how weird it was that he and I were friends, because I was a geeky kid with I had a fair bit of energy, and I always had a lot of focus and determination. Again, when I said that I wanted to be a surfer, I really wanted to be a surfer. And Jay lived 2 blocks away from me, and he was a year younger. And his dad, Kent, ran the surf mat concession at POP Pier, which was still going.
Wow.
So we would go down, we would ride this, Venice had this tram, you could catch this tram for a dime and go from Venice to, from where I was up to POP Pier, and I think all the way to Santa Monica Pier. And my brother and I and a friend of ours named Johanna would get off, and we would go down, run down to where Kent Sherwood, Jay's stepdad, where he had his mat concession. And sometimes if we got there early enough, Kent, who would been like a Howley Beach Boy, one of the rare ones in Waikiki, he had made Jay a little board, and it was this incredible mini. This would have been 67, so like the boards hadn't gone short yet. It was this incredible, like 6 foot long mini longboard with a psychedelic sort of swirl on it. And you can see pictures online of Jay holding this board. He's tiny. And we used to get up, and Jay, for some reason, didn't want us to watch him surf. We would kind of army crawl up the sand, and we would see Jay riding waves in the whitewater next to POP. And I think that it was his mom, Fellaine, who somehow, I don't know, she didn't pick me out or anything, but she knew that I was the one. She wanted Jay to have a surf partner. And in the summer of 69, Fellaine said, I'll drive you guys, you and Jay, every morning to north side Santa Monica Pier, drop you off. I was 9, Jay was 8. And then I'll come get you later on. And we'd go down with the brown bag. And so I learned to surf because Jay and I, and again, Jay was a lunatic even at age 8. And I was this sort of fairly reserved, timid, bookwormy kid.
Yep.
But we met in how much we wanted to surf way more than my brother wanted to surf, or my other friends wanted to surf. And then, the year after that, the surf part of it started, we got skateboards, and then Jay and I were both doing those two things together. And then somehow we became sort of a. Do you remember that there was a surfboard company called CME in the Valley?
Of
Remember
course.
Siri
Yeah,
Muscarella
for sure.
Enterprises.
Yeah.
Somehow Jay and I ended up on the CME team really early on. I don't remember that didn't last very long, and then we went almost like a package deal over to Jeff Ho.
Okay.
And I got my first Jeff Ho surfboard, I think in '72 or '3. It was gorgeous. It had a Stesic airbrush, wishbone airbrush on it. It was a little swallowtail. It was the thing that I loved more than anything living, or it was and it got stolen off the racks. We were checking the surf at Secas. And it was maybe the last time I cried. I cried my eyes out all the way home. My board.
Wow.
I had the board for about maybe 2 months. And my dad took pity on me and he said, if you can earn X amount of money, I'll make up the rest and we'll go get you another one. And I had to go work on Uncle Dan, my guy who got me started surfing. He was building a catamaran in Marina del Rey. And I went and helped him. I don't think I was very much help. It was a trimaran, sanding his, and I earned some money, went in, I barely had enough. We put this money down. My dad ponied up the rest. And I'm going to get my new Jeff Ho board. And 3 weeks later, I go in to pick it up. And it wasn't a Jeff Ho. It was it had this weird lettering on it. And I go, what? And Skipper says, oh, it's a Zephyr. And they didn't have labels yet. It just had a airbrush, like Craig had airbrushed a thing that said Zephyr.
Okay.
It maybe had a stencil.
Okay.
And I found out years later that was the first Zephyr thing ever made.
No kidding.
And first of all, I was so bummed out. Like I'm going, Zephyr, what's a Zephyr? I don't want it. And my dad's going, oh, it's a wind or something. And it turns out what Zephyr was originally was the budget version of Jeff Ho surfboards, because Jeff Ho boards were high end. Like those boards were pretty pricey.
Okay.
And Zephyr was going to be their budget line. Skateboards weren't even in the picture yet. So I had the first Zephyr. I was bummed out about it at first, but the board was a little round pin that Jeff Ho shaped, and I saw Jeff Ho last year, and he remembered shaping it because it was the first one. And he was, I made you it was like a 6.6 round pin. I don't know what I was doing riding a 6.6, so I was tiny, but it was a great board, and I won the Bay Area residents, the Santa Monica Bay Street contest. I won the boys division.
Okay.
On that board.
Wow.
And I was off. So that, and then I rode for Zephyr for a couple of years. I was never on the skate team, but again, Jay and I were all the way at this point, like surf-wise, kind of not quite connected at the hip. And I've thought about this all the time because, first of all, any little edge that I have in me, any little part of me that's not completely wimpy and just, it was because I hung out with Jay, because Jay was always getting me into all kinds of crazy shit. And I picked up a little bit of that from him. He got nothing from me. He didn't start reading books or anything, but I got that from him. We just were surfing and skating all the time, and he was always better than me at both. So right from the beginning, we were both progressing along really well, really quickly. But I've always maintained that it's better not to be you don't want to be the guy that's, and all the attention went to Jay because, he was Jay Adams. He was so compelling and attractive. And
At that time, did you have any idea that the sort of Dogtown and Z-Boys would be so influential?
No, zero. No.
Yeah. We've talked about this before, but I was sort of adjacent to that world, and I grew up in the Valley, so I always felt like an outsider, and I was a lot younger. But I skated at Kenter, Paul Revere, etc. I saw those guys out in the surf, and there was this swagger that they had that was so compelling.
Right.
And I was a nerdy kid too, and I was awkward, and I overthought things even back then. And I just looked at these guys who were just kind of swaggering through life and moving without thinking too much. But when I first smoked weed, I realized that, they're just really stoned all the time.
I left Venice midway through 7th grade and moved to Beverly Glen and then moved to Manhattan Beach. So everything all the good stuff I could have gotten out of Venice, I got out of it and left just before drugs and all this other shit. So all of my friends from Mark Twain Junior High School, not all of them, I think almost all of them sort of came off the rails a bit. It was hard. It was a weird, you didn't want to be an 8th grader or a high schooler in Venice. You did. I mean, it was still great, but it in a completely unplanned. My parents split up, and I went with my dad to. My mom moved to Manhattan Beach. My dad moved to Beverly Glen, and I went with him. My brother went to Manhattan Beach, which I don't know why they figured that out, but there I was up in Beverly Glen, sort of still surfing with Jay, but not in the middle of when it started getting kind of chaotic.
Yeah.
And it was lucky.
Yeah, and it was real chaotic. And you and I having surfed a lot and knowing surfers around the world. I mean, I often think at this stage of life, I think that surfing can be quite homogenized. We're all praying to the same God in so many ways.
Right.
But I also think back to my LA upbringing, and I think I'm very grateful because there was more diversity. And I know that's a very popular word now, but there were all different skin tones
Totally
and colors. True. There was different, socioeconomic backgrounds.
All of that.
We were in this wild mix, but there was also the threat of going wayward because there was a lot of the wayward.
Right. So again, if you can if you can take what's valuable out of what you just talked about and somehow manage to, so Stacy Peralta, stayed in Venice and didn't get, he just stayed ambitious and stayed. I mean, not. I love that he stayed ambitious. I mean, he didn't get caught up in any of the weird stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it was such that time with the music we were listening to, it was kind of a badge of honor to be able to do the biggest bong rip you could. Or, there was this thing of like, this is how you get acceptance by being on the edge.
Right.
Jay being Jay was the trailblazer in so many ways.
I mean, there was nothing that any of us did that he didn't, nothing that any of us picked up that he didn't, sort of go the furthest. And I remember right about when we started surfing, it might have even been the year before, we were at lunchtime at Florence Nightingale Elementary, and it was Sloppy Joe Day. And you'd get these packets of every Sloppy Joe would come with a packet of hot sauce. And I don't know how Jay got this idea, but he had his Sloppy Joe, and he went around and he said, "Everybody give me your hot sauce." And he just poured on the hot sauce until it was just He wanted to set the record for how many hot sauces you could put on a Sloppy Joe and eat it, and he did. Some of us might have been putting on 2 hot sauces. He put on 25. And then Jay, we're playing hoops, and he would never not shoot a half-court shot. He just all he wanted to do was hit a half-quarter, even if in the middle of a 3-on-3. And so everything he did was going to be something. The last time I saw him, just a few months before he died, I hadn't seen him for years, and we met at Costa Del Mar.
Yep.
He and I go in there to have lunch and reconnect, and Stesic was there as well, and Jay's wife was there. And Jay, it was shocking to see him. I'd seen pictures of him, but he looked every one of his years at that point, plus a few more. I mean, he lived so hard, and God knows what he was thinking about looking at me with my glasses and my bald head and my I was living in Seattle by that point. I was pasty and everything, But so in some sense, there was that same relationship where he was the crazy one and I was the, and then we get outside and we're walking around a beautiful day, and Jay couldn't help himself but go up to people, and I think he had a camera, and he just kept going up to people he didn't know and saying, hold it right there, look at that. And he was just, and it's all done, I think, just to keep his brain. I mean, I think he must have been very ADD or something. He just, even at, however, we were in our maybe early or mid 50s at that point, he couldn't help himself. He was just out there still stirring stuff up.
Yeah. He was a fascinating character. I remember I knew him. He was more into surfing, and skating was more in the background at this point, and I was much deeper into surfing. And I remember seeing him at one point, and he'd gotten sober and he'd found God, and he had a Bible with him, and he was quoting scripture and all this stuff.
Again, even if he's going to get into scripture, if he's going to get into the Bible, he's going to really get into the Bible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he was on that tip, and then I saw him probably 2 months later, and he was maybe in the Topanga parking lot, I think it was, and he was smoking a joint, and he had a different look in his eyes. Oh. And I said, "Jay, what about the born again Christian stuff?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm a hypocristian."
He was funny.
Yeah, very charismatic.
Yeah.
So from there, you would have found your way up to Malibu.
I'm trying to get I'm sitting here trying to get it's so long ago now. There was one summer at north side of Santa Monica Pier, and the next summer was sort of Bay Street. So it would have been the summer of sort of 71, I guess. Malibu came into the picture, but it wasn't daily because we still had that was a harder ask to get up to Malibu.
Yeah.
I think wasn't there a thing called the Malibu bus that you could
Yes, and I used to take it actually. and you could. I took it from West LA because my cousins lived there, but there was a Pico bus that went to the end, and then there was, I think it was like the 434, and it dropped down the ramp, and then it went up PCH.
But I feel like it was a bus that was designed. Like, it was a bus that you could take your board on, which I don't know if you could on other. Maybe anyway. I remember there was a bus that we could take, but we also would get rides up there from somebody's parents would drop us up, take us up there. So we were pretty much on the regular like that. I want to say I think it was the summer of 71.
Okay.
And again, you walk on that beach with Jay, and I had just turned 11, and he was probably 10. I mean, we were both small. Like we were both, we looked younger than we were, and it might have happened without Jay, but I doubt it. But we just automatically got adopted or taken in by I don't know, by Dave White. Remember Dave White?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And Kurt Murray and Mike Marcelino.
Sure.
We're just right in with all the, we walk in and immediately we're just in with all the cool guys because we're like the little sort of mascots. And I was telling you about this before. Like, so we get up there, and by this point, God, how many ridiculous boards did I have at that early stage? If you were getting boards in that time, the boards were changing all the time. And I remember the board I was riding my first summer at Malibu was a 6'8" by 16-inch wide Blue Cheer. Remember Blue Cheer?
Yeah, of course.
It was a board like that Tiger Aspera or BK would have been riding at Haleiwa, like with both of his feet, like with your feet going from rail to rail. Like it was just it was just this pocket rocket splinter of a surfboard that a 10-year-old I had no business. Someone at Blue Cheer just said, "Oh, this one, hey kid, hey Grammy, this board would be perfect for you."
Yeah.
And there I was with my Blue Cheer 6'6", and I thought I was just killing it because I had this board that looked like the boards that Jock Sutherland was riding.
Yeah.
And I got these pictures of myself inside. Jay and I, when you go to Malibu, the first thing you do is you sort of paddle out almost not at the pier, but you're at the very last section of First Point.
Yep. Kind of the bunny slope.
Hoping that people will fall off as they come down.
Exactly.
Or else just knowing that if, I think both of us knew that we were small enough that we could drop in on anybody and no one's going to give us too much shit. Plus we knew Dave White. So, we already felt under it was like, sort of like under the mafia protection.
Sure.
And I got these pictures of me in a flapping beaver tail riding a 6'6" by 16-inch wide gun that a normal person would have ridden at triple overhead Haleiwa. And just feeling like, I've nailed the surfing shit. I got this stuff down.
Yeah.
So that was our introduction to Malibu. Was going down there with a bag lunch, stealing food from Jack in the Box.
Yep.
Hanging out with teenagers, including the girls were all hanging out with Mike Marcelino and Kurt Murray. It was just like we were just in with the cool kids at Malibu.
Nice.
Yeah, it was great.
And then you found your way up to Third Point eventually.
Right. So all that was fun. Hanging out was fun, stealing the food was fun, just being part of the scene was fun. But I think for Jay and I both, it wasn't like we were up there really to socialize. We really did. When you go to Malibu and you're ambitious, like both of us were, you start off at that area, that place, and we'd be there all day. And it took us maybe a year or so to you just start inching your way up toward Third Point. And the year that I was there, the year that I started anyway, and I think for the next few years, there were Second Point was really in play. Like there was three pretty distinct points.
Yep.
And I remember you sort of get to the top of the point at First Point, and it was great, except you could get up there and sort of slice and dice, but it was really crowded. And I remember, we talked about this, speaking of Alan Sarlo, Alan was a couple of years older than me, and he was the first he felt much older than me, but he was the first guy that's more or less my age that made it to Third Point. If you made it to Third Point, that was like, finishing the game of life, or you've arrived.
Sure.
And we'd be in there, Jay and I'd be in there at First Point looking up, and now and then, even in 71, Alan could do a big, pretty vicious off the top move. He was, at 14, he was big. And he was, he surfed like a man.
Yep.
At 14 or 15.
Yeah, he had a mustache. He was hairy.
Right.
I think he even smoked cigars at one point.
Yeah. Well, and he had all the muscle, and he also, I think, I met Alan because he was on the Weber team, and he had a pink Weber Performer or a pink Weber ski. I can't remember what the name of which model it was. And he kept his board. The Sarlo family manse was up a couple miles inland, maybe, or a mile inland. And Alan didn't drive yet. And we lived right on the beach, so he kept his board in my basement. And he would ride his bike down and take his board and go surf the jetty or go surf breakwater. But by the time we got to Malibu and I knew Alan was the guy you'd look up the point and see him up there throwing big fans. So it was like, not only did I want to go up there and surf, I want to go up there and show Alan that I can do this sort of thing. But second point was I got sort of stuck at second point for a while because it was so much less crowded than first or third. And even when I got my pass, when I figured out I could go surf third, I was often going down to surf second because, you could get a lot more waves. Weren't as good. But yeah, that Malibu project lasted, 3 years. I kept surfing Malibu until I left Beverly Glen and moved to Manhattan Beach. I would go pretty often. It was my favorite place. But those first couple years when you're working your way up the point I wouldn't want to rank them necessarily, but I certainly think about those years maybe more than I do any other period of my surf life. And it just seemed like there was no, I guess the competition kind of started coming into it, but it was just this self-contained project. It was just to get up to third point, earn away. Like Malibu was just its own little challenge or game or mission or whatever you want to call it, And I'm so glad to have had that experience.
Yeah. It's an interesting spot in that way. You competed, you did well, you went on to become a pro. I want to say I remember you in one of the first OP pros. It might have been 1982, the year that Shane Horan did the backside 360. I can still see you not Huntington hopping, but weaving back and forth and making your way into the shore break. And I want to say pulling into a barrel.
Maybe.
But you definitely competed in like a 1982 OP pro. Would that be accurate?
It was the first one. So I don't have a gift for anything I've done except that I will sink my teeth into something and not let go until I've gotten pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And contest surfing was sort of one of the first things. Again, anything I started off doing, I was always in the middle of the pack, but I would relentlessly get better at it until enough people had sort of dropped out that I was closer to the top. And I did surf as a pro, and I will still tell people that one year, that year of the OP Pro, which I guess was 82, I think I finished 43rd in the world that year.
Okay.
Based on like one or two contests. It's kind of like a thing that I, if anyone knows about what the rankings were like, that kind of doesn't mean much. But if you don't know too much about the rankings, you go, you're number 43. That's pretty good.
Yeah. They're thinking tennis or golf.
Right.
Yeah.
But that was the year, I think I was 21 or 2. And I already knew I was getting sort of a little old to be doing it. But I had two contest results that I'm sort of proud of. Is in I think 77 I got 6th place in the first ever Caton contest.
Okay.
And I was the only amateur up there, so there was like a big deal. Warshaw gave up $300 to maintain his amateur status. And I still had long hair and glasses, and I was too young to drive. My mom had to drive me to the contest, so I must have been 15. And it was a funny contest. They had most of it at all the other Catons they had at the pier, but that first one they had at Huntington at the Cliffs.
Okay.
And they had 6. It was so funny. I mean, it was so funny how they used to have contests. 6-man heats, and it was a nice simple format. Top 3 advance. They just kept cutting it in half.
Yep.
But the starting field was like hundreds of people.
Yeah, I remember that.
And they probably judged us on our best 4 or 5 waves, 20-minute heats, best 4 waves. Good luck to you out there.
Insane.
And I just kept, this is the perfect sort of synopsis of my life as a competitive surfer. I just kept getting third. So I just kept barely making it. And then sort of getting down near the end, I had a heat, one of those heats, and Larry Berleman was in it. And I go, well, this is going to end now. I never had a heat. I almost never paddled out in a heat where I thought, I'd probably come as far as I'm going to go in this contest, And I knew I was going to have to surf against Larry Berleman the next day and a bunch of, 4 or 5 other hot guys. And they were on a really tight time schedule for this Caton contest. And we showed up the next day for this heat, for the event, and it was huge, super short period wind swell. You've seen that picture of Sean Thompson, the first Caton, doing this big backside turn underneath a big closeout, like a black and white.
I don't think I remember.
So it must have been right out, like Sean, it was right after the free ride year.
Okay.
It came over, so it must have been 76 maybe. Anyway, just big, ugly beach break closeouts, super short period. And there was a rip going from north to south, like, like a river. And, we put on those nylon tie jerseys.
Yes.
Horn honks. Off we go. And all of us just start drifting down like this, right? And I just started turning around and catching reforms, and then running up the beach and catching a reform. And I guess Larry Bertleman, I don't know why. Why would he want to play that game? But the point, just to cut to the end of the story, I beat Larry Bertleman in a heat. Riding reforms at Huntington Cliffs on a day that you would just go straight to whatever the next thing on your day was.
Yeah.
And then they changed they had the end of the contest, the last two heats at San Pedro, whatever the point is, right next to the harbor. I think maybe it's just called Pedro Point or something.
Okay.
Anyway, so I got sixth in that, and I was just a legend at Miracosta because I was young, I had the right hair.
Yeah.
And it was great. I went back to school, and I hadn't hit puberty yet, but I'd gotten sixth place in the first Caden.
Wow, that's impressive.
That was cool. And I actually remember thinking, well, that's probably it. I don't think, again, my confidence was never that good. And then a couple of years where I did some pro contests, and I'd make a few semifinals. And then that first OP came, and I had actually said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I wasn't getting any good results. And remember Kip Jurger?
Yes, of course. Canoa surf.
Kip Jurger gave me this pep talk here in Manhattan Beach once. He said, you got to keep going. You're not done, Matt. And I said, all right, Kip, I will. And he didn't, I just remember that I didn't know him that well, but he just did this really nice thing and told me, he thought I was still surfing well. And did you surf in that contest, or did you just go watch it?
I just watched it.
You would have been like 15 or 16 or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So they had this massive, remember they used to have trials? The top 16 got seeded, and they had this trials events.
Yes. A lot of heats to get through, yeah.
Endless amount of heats to get through. And I won the trials. I actually had I was feeling good. I had a great board. Richard Cram got first in one of the other heats.
Wow, such a good surfer.
And Glenn Winton, I think, got first in the other heat. So I was in really good company.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there, and they drew names out of a hat to see who was going to surf against the top 16. And I was sitting there probably with Dennis Jarvis, and I said, I knew the top 16, I knew every one of them. I said, there's only two surfers in this that I think I can maybe beat. I think I can maybe beat Terry Richardson, and I think I can beat Bobby Owens in these waves. And they pull my name, and I get Bobby Owens. And I beat Bobby Owens, and I drew Terry Richardson.
Wow.
Who kicked my ass. Terry Richardson just kicked my ass.
Okay.
But I got ninth place. And that was, and then I did a few more pro contests, but it was clearly, I was done. I think I went to the Stubbies that year in Australia and just got my ass kicked and came home and said, I'm done.
What's interesting to talk about? So my trajectory was similar, and I was a mid 40s ranked surfer in the world.
Much better pro.
Well, that's nice of you to say. But what we share in common, Matt, is we grew up, enamored of this world. We kind of became part of that world, became one of the subjects, so to speak. And then we sort of stepped back and did this kind of observation of the culture. It's a sort of, if you're a curious person and you read and write, as we did,
right,
it seems like a fairly obvious path, but it's also kind of, you're on the stage, and then you sort of jump behind the curtain, so to speak, in many ways. When did you start documenting and becoming an editor or writer, etc.?
After that OP thing, I think I probably kept trying to be a pro for a year or two. Meanwhile, I was working at ET Surfboards in Hermosa Beach.
Yep.
So there I was, a typical thing where you're behind the good surfer who works behind the counter at the surf shop.
Yeah.
And I think Body Glove might have been paying me $100 a month at
Okay.
that point, something like that. I was on their team. And then somebody came around ET. This guy named Jeff Abigail from New Jersey, and he had moved to Manhattan Beach, and he decided he was going to start this surfing sort of a zine, or not. It wasn't a zine. That word didn't exist then, but it was going to be sort of a tabloidy, track size surf magazine or whatever. And he came around, and he was trying to get. He was just this one guy working out of an office. I don't know what made him think he was the guy for this job. No one had seen him or heard of him. But he seemed sincere, he seemed driven, and I was 23. And I think that guy coming in saying he was going to work on this was the thing that you're talking about. Because I just thought, my first thought was, okay, I want to write something for this guy. And then the person I've always talked about things with when it's an important decision to make or I'm going to make some move has always been my dad, still is. And he probably said, well, why don't you see if he needs a partner? And I said, that's a great idea. And I went and my dad came in, and I think for $2,000 maybe that my dad said, I'll stake you this. I became a partner in this magazine thing. I only stayed for a couple of issues, but that was clearly like I went from working at I still was working at the surf shop. I went from working at a surf shop and being a pro surfer, sort of, to working in a surf shop and not being a pro surfer and working in this tiny little alley office in downtown Manhattan Beach to create South Bay Surfer.
Okay.
So I watched the magazine get put together. I helped pick the photos. I watched the whole thing sort of go through all the way until I went around to shops and dropped off stacks of magazines. And I loved it. I loved the whole thing.
Yeah, I did too. I mean, it's interesting because I think back when I was probably very similar to you. I was in 15 when I started competing seriously. All I wanted to do was become a pro. And then I did around 19, 20, and then it ended at age 25. But as soon as I sort of just resigned from this dream and stepped into magazines, I felt such a sense of relief, honestly.
Right.
I felt like I don't have to pose as this like Rocky Balboa character anymore. I'm competitive in many ways, but not in a heat in the way of.
Well, you were a Quicksilver model.
At the time, Quicksilver was expanding their line from board shorts and T-shirts and do all this stuff, and they neatly threw me in the clothes for a lot of stuff.
What I'm saying is that also doesn't like you. I got the sense that you were having to do something that you, even at that point, you were probably stoked to be doing it. But like, I always think of you as a man of of the mind, who you kind of, and I know that you made the transition also from being sort of this pretty young surfer to being a serious writer.
Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, had I been winning contests, I might not have been thrown into that category, but it was sort of like, I'll do whatever you guys want me to do to stay on your payroll. And I was on a small retainer. I think I made like $500 a month. And I just somehow parlayed that into getting around the world.
But again, like the other thing we're not talking about is when it wasn't even so much like, I'm not making it as a pro. I better do the other thing that I truly love. It was more like, how do I keep this going? Like,
yes.
What do I have to do? I'll anything I could do to not be working at a restaurant?
Yeah, exactly.
Or something.
Yeah.
And so
yeah. But I think for me personally, and I want to hear your version of this, when I went sort of, I'm going to be behind the scenes now, and I'm going to make magazines, and I'm going to actually get to be the great surf fan that I always was from the beginning. Right. And when I say I was competitive, but in many ways, I always think when I was on the tour, I was still awestruck by these guys. I remember being in the competitors area, had a heat coming up in an hour, and I would be kind of grouping out on Tom Kern and watching how he waxes his board, and Gary Elkerton and like how he, rubs his fins, cleans them before he paddles out. These guys were still on my bedroom walls at home on their pictures.
Do you think that had anything to do with you being I don't mean to be not derogatory, but you were a Valley kid. Like I
was a Valley kid for sure.
So all your whole life coming up, part of you's still like the outsider.
Absolutely.
Even when you're owning Third Point, you're still the Valley kid.
No, for sure. And I didn't know it at the time, but I think these were skills that would later become writing a profile of someone where you kind of get out of yourself and you sort of explore their worlds and you spend time with them as we've both done. Right. But when you so you did the local magazine here in the South Bay, and then you would have gone on to Surfer, and
I had a perfect intermediary, like 8 months at a magazine you'll remember called Breakout.
Of course, and I remember your byline in Breakout.
I'm so like I feel like there was a whole period there with South Bay Surfer and with Breakout like that should have been stuff that I was doing in school somewhere that nobody should ever be allowed to see. Like all of my really embarrassing early writing and stuff and like it's all out there if anyone wants to dig for it. And I'm not encouraging this, but like it's so cringy. Like all this early stuff I did that should have been hidden away is not hidden away. It's out there, and I've got copies of it. And every now and then, I have to go look at some of those those Breakout magazines and read the stuff that I was doing, and it was awful. But I did one article that caught the attention of Pesman at Surfer, and they were going to hire somebody. I can't remember what I don't. It was like it was the end of '84, and a position opened up, and I was so gung ho at Breakout. It's like, well, I'm gonna fight. I'm gonna be on the little guy team. I want to be on the. We're gonna knock those guys out. Like Breakout was kind of on a roll.
Mm-hmm.
And again, my dad saying, "Are you fucking kidding me? Don't work at Breakout. Go work for Surfer."
Yeah.
And Surfer wasn't Surfer kind of 84, 85 wasn't as cool as it had been, you know, but it was still Surfer.
Yeah.
And I went in, interviewed, and there was a guy who also worked at Breakout named Dave Hirschman who went in and interviewed. And I decided actually before I had that conversation with my dad that I was going to stay at Breakout. I was just going to, and then my dad said, "No, go get," and I had to go back and say, "I've changed my mind. Can you still consider me?" And they hired me.
And then you eventually became the editor of Surfer.
Again, I say that I was editor. I was editor. I was at Surfer for 6 years, and I still have my business card that says I was the editor. I was the editor for like 6 months because. Okay. So I still like to say, yeah, I always say anyway. I was the editor at Surfer Magazine.
Yep.
I was the editor I'd already decided I was going to leave and go back to school, and they said, "You want to be the editor?" I said, "Okay," because I knew that I wanted to have that title or that experience.
Yeah.
So I was the editor for only 6 months. I was the managing editor for quite some time before that. And Paul Holmes, who was the editor, was really busy with what was called Surfer TV back then. So I kind of was being the editor, but I really wasn't editor for that long.
But an interesting time in surfing. I mean, being at the magazine in the editorial trenches, so to speak, you would have been working with Art Brewer, the photographer, Derek Hine, the writer. I mean, really some great people in surf culture, right?
It was the magazines that we produced. I'm not thrilled with how there was sounds so petty to say this. I didn't particularly like with the way the magazines looked. The covers I don't think looked that great, and it wasn't a great time for how the magazine looked. And Surfing magazine was making some beautiful issues back then. What I remember best from my period at Surfer was working with Derek Hine and Matt George, and with those two, I remember really clearly that. I was always a little bit in awe of Derek Hine, but Derek, surprisingly, for how sort of prickly he comes off as, or how sort of eclectic and you'd think kind of difficult, was so easy to work with. He and I together kind of created that top 44 thing. Remember the top 32 thing, whatever.
Yeah, the assessments. Yeah,
right. And that was something that Derek sort of came up with, or I still don't remember if I came up with it or Derek came up with it. I think Derek came up with it. But we worked on that pretty closely, and they got better each year. Like Derek kept, and it was like it became a thing that it was sort of surfers, Surfing had the bikini issue, and we had the top 44 thing.
Yeah.
And to this day, some of that stuff reads great.
Yeah, I think so too.
Derek was a delight to work with, and then Matt George was doing these amazing profile pieces. We did one on Kelly and one on Tom, and Matt and I.
Shane Horan, Rainbow Bridge.
Shane Horan, Rainbow Bridge one.
Yeah.
So those are like the two. Those were like that. It was like that was like the Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig of me. I was mostly managing. I wasn't doing as much writing myself, but it was really fun working with those two.
Yep. But in the middle of that, suddenly you moved to San Francisco and go to UC Berkeley.
I turned 30, and I felt that I needed to do something big, and I just pretty quickly just went, fuck it, I'm leaving Surfer, and I'm going up, and I flew up to Cal, and I had these terrible like C and B grades from San Diego State and El Camino Junior College, but I just got in a plane, flew up to meet someone at Cal in the admissions department, walked in, and I said, look, my scores are terrible over here. I know that, and my SAT is, but look, I'm 30. I just turned 30, and I need to have this. Needs to be this new direction in my life, and I can't sort of go forward unless I can go to a school that I believe will. And she looked it over, and she goes, "Well, you need to go retake these two classes, and you're in."
Wow. But one thing that happened during these San Francisco years, along with the degree at UC Berkeley and the many barrels and big waves of Ocean Beach, was the Encyclopedia of Surfing.
Yeah.
Which, let me just say, Matt, I am so grateful to. I read a lot about surfing, and I reference it so frequently. I should probably be sending you checks every Christmas. But how did it come about, and how did you do it?
After I graduated from Cal, I didn't know what to do next, like any other undergrad. I just go, oh, great, I've got an undergrad degree. I was 32. What am I going to do now? And all I could think of, I sort of panicked, but I applied to get a PhD in history. I go, I'll just keep going, and then I'll just teach history. And I got into a program. I got into the PhD program at UCLA. So I moved down here, probably fall of '93 or '94. Bought all my books, signed up for my classes, and went to class for 3 weeks and realized there was no fucking way I was going to spend minimum 6 years studying history at this level. Like, wow. And I was sitting in a classroom with kids that were just so stoked to be studying it. And I was faking it. And I was a good enough writer then that I could sort of turn in pages. I got A's in a lot of classes where other people were getting B's because I could outwrite them.
Yeah.
I didn't know the subject any better, but anyway, I'm really stoked that took me just 3 weeks to figure that out. I just ate the cost of a lot of books and I just pulled back. And but then I was like going, well, fuck, now what? And I just started writing these long articles for Surfers Journal. I did a 10,000 word article on Rabbit and an 8,000 word piece on Jacques Sutherland. And I'd also started collecting magazines and just sort of building, because I'd been in history, I sort of knew if you want to do history, you got to have the source material. So I had this small bookshelf and at one point, again, on the phone with my dad, I was just going, we're having one of our weekly, what are you going to do next conversations? And I said something like, I probably know about as much about surfing as anybody else does at this point. And he goes, well, why don't you write an encyclopedia? And I went, ha, ha, ha. And he didn't laugh back. And so my dad planned this idea, do an encyclopedia. And I moved back to San Francisco, wrote a few more things, and then decided, well, I'll try. I'll pitch this idea to do an encyclopedia. And Chronicle rejected it. I wrote another proposal, resubmitted it, and Harcourt got into a little bidding war, I think, with Chronicle. This was maybe a year later. So when was it? No, it was a couple of years later. Anyway, it was my dad's idea, and it was weird. Like, writing a reference book is not actually, from what I had done up to that point, didn't really make much sense because I'd written long. I mean, I'm really into people. Like, I want to talk to somebody about what their lives were and figure out how it all fits into da-da. And I really wrote a reference book. I wrote an A through Z reference book with short little things from Camp Auberg to Frida Zamba. Yeah. And it took forever. I blew through so many deadlines. People at Harcourt were basically writing me off this whole thing. And it came out, and it kind of blew everyone's mind, because I don't think people didn't know that I was actually going to take that much time and write it like a real. I took the project really, really seriously.
Yeah. How long did it take?
I think it took either 4 or 5 years. Okay. And it was supposed to take 2, and the first year, all I did was I got a copy of FileMaker Pro, this database program, and I just, every single surf magazine and book and video I had, I just entered. I made a huge database. So if I was going to do an article, a little piece on Camp Auberg, I didn't have to go, I think there's an article in Surf Guide, and I would type in Camp Auberg, and I would get 6 different things about him, and then I could write the piece. There was no way I was going to write the encyclopedia without having the database.
Yes. And there wasn't the Google searching that we have now at that time.
It wouldn't have mattered if there was, because the surf magazines, like Surf Guide and Surfer, they're not on Google.
Yeah.
So, taking the time to do the database, and I've talked about, I get really excited talking about databasing. There's nothing more boring to try to make a podcast out of. The first date I ever had with Jody, I was sort of in the middle of all this, and I was really nervous, and we're walking to lunch for a lunch date, and I started telling her about something having to do with databasing. And to this day, 18 years later, she will say, "Remember that first time we went out and you started talking about databasing?" And she'll look at me, she'll kind of nod, she goes, "I married you anyway." I'm doing it right now. I'm talking about databasing, but it is a superpower. If you have, nobody else in surf had a database that would call up all this material.
Yeah.
So if I want, again, every single thing that was in Encyclopedia of Surfing, because I'd taken 18 months to do all the prep work on it, I could write those things quick, because I could just do a search. I could bring up I could find the stuff I needed and write the thing and move on to the next one.
Yep. And looking at the kind of economy of language, or the economy of words,
right?
There was not a wasted word, right? You can't afford to when you're writing something like that, where there's that many entries.
Right.
Do you feel like that's affected your writing and your kind of approach to writing?
What I figured out from that was that a lot of times writing that isn't fancy, and the Encyclopedia of Surfing is really, really pretty straightforward and plain.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that it has to be sort of dry. Like I figured out from writing that, and again, every single one of those, I think there were 1,500 entries, had to be economical. So it was a book, so I had to make it fit. It wasn't like now on the website where it can go as long as it wants.
Yep.
And it was like, I almost think of it in colors, like, okay, most of this is just going to be sort of black and white because I have to get age, where were they raised, where was the first time they surfed, Yep. But then you think every now and then you get to add a little, you can add just a couple places in every entry you can figure out where to put a little bit of color. Where can I? And a lot of that times that would come like, if I'm doing a page on Jamie Brisick, I would go off, I would say where you were born, where you learned how to surf, but I would find somebody who would have had a quote. By color, I mean, it's just like, Jamie was the best surfer to never not make the 16, and he was a super nice guy. And when I say color, I mean you're going to put something in there, right? That's going to be Or I love, like, in the few cases where I was dealing with someone who was kind of an asshole, I could find somebody else who would find the quote saying, like somebody said about Johnny Boy Gomes. Johnny Boy Gomes has soured more surf sessions than any other human on the planet. And that wasn't me. It was Tim Baker. I got to let Tim Baker do my dirty work on that shit. Sure. And that's also, that for me is like digging that stuff out instead of just saying that Johnny Boy Gomes could be a difficult person to surf with. If I can find a quote with someone like as good as Tim Baker is to do that, and then it's not, so that was the fun part, was being able to do it quickly, but also have enough to keep your eye going. And I've had people try to write EOS pages, and it turns out this thing that I thought was relatively formatted and kind of by the numbers almost, it's not that easy. I've had good writers who sort of couldn't do it at least the way I wanted it done.
How do you think, as someone who's written an entire encyclopedia on surfing, how has that affected you? Your bandwidth, your ability, your memory, your ability to hold all this stuff in your head? Because I read your Sunday joints every Sunday, and they're effectively it feels like you're drawing from that well, but you're having fun and playing within it.
That's it exactly.
Yeah, but did the Encyclopedia of Surfing change your life?
I don't think anything. I can't think of what the thing that changed my life was my parents moving to Venice when I was 7. That changed my life. That move to San Francisco changed my life for sure. And then meeting Jody and having a kid changed my life. Like, there's only 3 things. The rest of it, I don't know how it would have happened.
Having surfed a lot through our teens and 20s, I find, whether it's writing specifically about surfing or something else entirely, I feel like writing has come and filled that space that surfing consumed for so many years in my life. And it's almost, I mean, I could get, it'd be corny to say this, but the sentences moving across the page is like sliding across a wave. But I feel that sometimes. I'm in it and consumed in it, and there's the kind of afterglow where I will write for the day and then I'll take a walk and it's still in my head, the same way surfing is.
I completely agree with all of that. And nothing for me, it's not quite apples to apples, but what I agree with you 100% is that the way I used to surf, which got me as far as it did, but also ended up being sort of the Achilles heel, which is that total focus. Like, if I wasn't, I could never surf. Even the other day at Bolsa Chica, riding an 8-foot board and gasping for breath, I'd never able to surf without thinking, how do I do this better? How do I'm fully into it. And I was never cruising. I was always just, I loved that for a long time. And I don't really want to do that in surf anymore. I do want to do it when I sit down and do the Sunday joint, or when I'm making a little video clip. Like, I love losing myself in the work or the thing that I'm doing. I wake up every morning, not suicidal exactly. I wake up every morning feeling like I'm 62 and I'm just, I have to build, like, I'm depressed a little bit, and I'm what's it all? And I almost like wake up, and with the coffee and the breakfast, it's like I put myself back together.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot.
And then at 8:30, Teddy's off at school, Jody's down in the basement doing her work, and I am so looking forward to sitting down and working on whatever I'm going to do that day. And the weird part of, whatever weird shit I go through at almost, most nights, whatever fucked up dreams or whatever whatever that sort of the nights have just gotten so sort of strange, and I'm, I don't know what it all comes from, but I put myself back together every morning, and that's who I am, and the work gets me through the day. My family gets me through. And I'm super, super grateful for being able to have something that I want to do today at 62, as much as I wanted to do when I was 12 or 22 or 32 with surfing.
Yes.
So the work has replaced surfing in that sense.
Yeah.
But Jamie, what would make a huge difference, like this, just before you came over here today, we're sitting here in Manhattan Beach right now on a gorgeous day, and there's a decent, I guess, southwest swell running, and Manhattan Beach, as usual, in fall, is glorious offshore closeouts.
Yep.
And so I went down before you came over, and the water's cold. It's like in the upper 50s or whatever. Pulled on my still damp full suit from my other day at Boca Chica.
Yep.
And I ran out there, and I just threw myself into 4 or 5 shore break tubes, and just got a little tiny tube vision.
Yep.
And got rolled up on the sand. Went out.
Yep.
Did that. And if I could, I feel like what is missing with my life isn't, I don't want to surf that much. I don't want to stand on a board and see if I can do turns or see if I can not embarrass myself. But I really miss being in the ocean.
Yeah.
And I was only in the water today for 15 minutes, probably.
Yeah.
I missed ducking under waves.
Yes.
I missed, I just miss feeling that.
No, I agree with
And
you.
that's what so I would love to go ride 3 waves a day in shore break and just get, and I wasn't even riding. I was just jumping. I was just jumping into tubes.
Yeah. No,
like it's like I do that at Zoom all the time. Probably.
No, and I do a lot, all the time, and I often body surfing, and it's just getting that stuff on you.
Right.
It's just such a joy.
Right. So I do. That's like if I could make one little tweak in my life.
Yeah.
Like that would be it.
Yep. Thank you so much, Matt. It's been a pleasure chatting.
I love you. I love doing this with you, Jamie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Great. We'll do it again.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Take care.
Soundings is brought to you by the Surfers Journal and is produced by me, Jamie Brisick, and Jonathan Shiflett. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Our theme song is Give Me a Wave by Oscar Matsumiya and Paz Lenchantin. The Surfers Journal is a reader-supported publication made possible by sponsorship from FCS, Finisterre, Howler Brothers, Outerknown, Patagonia, Rainbow Sandals, Vans, and Yeti. The journal is published bi-monthly. If you haven't done so yet, I encourage you to visit surfersjournal.com and subscribe. This episode of Soundings is presented by Costa Sunglasses, the badge of the explorer. For over 40 years and counting, Costa has remained steadfast in their dedication to not only crafting the most durable, functional, and long-lasting eyewear, but in protecting our waterways and natural resources. Whether you're on the back deck scanning for yellowtail, eyeing a set swinging wide at an empty point, camped out on a bluff at the end of a rotted 2-track, or anywhere and everywhere in between, Costas are built to help you see what's out there. Head over to costadelmar.com today to find just the right pair for you, no matter where the water takes you. Thank you for listening to Soundings, and until next time.